President, I'm pleased to rise and make a contribution to this debate, but I do so from the position that this is another attempt by the government to damage religious freedom. Now, I'm very clear here that these religious freedom rights and other rights have to be balanced. And that is actually the essence of what this bill seeks to do, and we think it gets the balance wrong. We understand the concerns of some that excessive religious freedom or too strong religious freedom focus can lead to other rights being compromised, and it is inherently a balance, as we need to understand that all of these rights are balanced against each other. There is a history to this. In 2010, the then Brumby government moved a bill very similar to this. We went to the election with a clear commitment to remove it, and we did. The Labor Party went to the election in 2014 with a commitment to bring a similar bill forward, and indeed they did bring that bill forward, which was defeated in the last Parliament, and now this bill has come forward again into the same terrain. It's not identical, but there are very strong similarities in the bill, as people will understand. There is also a federal layer to this, as people will be aware, and I know others have made commentary about the position of federal Labor being divergent from the position of state Labor on these points. And I think it's important to understand that there is divergence within the Labor Party, within the Liberal Party, within a range of different communities as to what the proper balance to be struck is. But I do believe we need to treat religious freedom seriously. And we need to, as I say, it needs to be balanced against other rights. It's not, none of these are absolute rights. And, you know, in truth, of course, within a school, for example, or a religious institution, there are a series of positions that are clearly, in my view, positions that ought to be able to be positions that a faith community can choose people who have similar faith and perhaps specific skills within that faith. So it would be absurd, for example, to demand that a preacher in a particular faith be a person who did not hold that faith. That would be absurd. And in the same way, I mean, with a concurrent example that I could give is the ability of political members of Parliament to discriminate on a political basis against people who have different political views. You're not required to put into your office somebody who has a divergent political view. That is an accepted position, and there is exemptions in the Equal Opportunity Act for that, so that you're not required to, you know, I'm not required to have a communist in my office who has a completely divergent political view, and a Labor Party person is not required to have someone who would have a conservative political view in their office. And I think that makes entire sense. And in the same way, in a number of these areas, faith communities have legitimate positions that they wish to reflect and prosecute, and they need to do that within bounds, and I absolutely accept that none of these rights, none of them are absolute. They all have to be balanced against other rights in the community. Now, I do believe, though, that we do need to have a position where faith communities are able to exist and to reasonably, within bounds, promulgate their position through hiring policy and other arrangements. Now, my colleague, Mr. Bark, has gone through significant detail on this, but my purpose today is just to say that there are a number of principles here that I think we need to be focusing on. The truth also is that we do need to have reasonable protections for people who perhaps through sexuality or other characteristics need reasonable protection. So those are the balances that need to be struck. so that we can both protect individuals to the maximum reasonable extent, but at the same time understand that faith communities have a particular zone. In a liberal democracy, we can understand that, you know, there are faith communities with whom we disagree, and perhaps even vehemently disagree. There are faith communities that I have, you know, strong objection to. But in a liberal democracy, you need to have some zone where people can express and put forward their faith views. So these are the balances that have to be struck. And, you know, no one should pretend that these are easy. I don't pretend that these balances are easy and straightforward in being struck. But I do think where people have religious views, they want to send, for example, their children to a religious school, I think that the right of that religious community and school to have a fair level of control about who is employed and the circumstances in which they are employed is reasonable. My children go to Anglican school and a Methodist school, and I would indicate that I think those one of those schools, the Anglican school, has actually been pretty good in imparting what I would call reasonable views on Christian values. I would say that the other school is a magnificent school, but has been less successful in imparting some of those views. So, you know, again, this is a balance. People actually do want some continuity and tradition with values. They want some continuity and tradition flowing through with our Christian links and past. I am one of those people. I'm also very able to say that within our community there are people who have quite different views and different values, different religious values, quite divergent from the ones that I would hold. And I think it's interesting, the individualistic idea that is at the core of human rights is in its essence developed through Christian traditions. And I think that this is an important point to understand. The idea of the individual, the invention of the individual, is an important historical, philosophical, and in part religious concept. And I think that the idea of individual rights in this way comes straight through that trajectory of Christian values, of the values that come from, frankly, the monotheistic traditions of the Middle East, as it would have once been called, and, you know, Judaism, but particularly Christianity, developing that very strong individualistic tradition, treating every person as an important person and entity in themselves. And, you know, straight through to the Kantian tradition, philosophical ideas about the categorical imperative and so forth. I think these are very, very important ideas in the development of the ideas of human rights, the ideas of the zone of an individual, the ideas that are behind the need to protect individuals in general. And and to some extent, you know, if I can put it this way, once upon a time, and pick a period historically, but not that long ago, our country and many Western countries were overwhelmingly Christian and had a much deeper and sharper collective understanding of rights and understandings of how people should behave and be treated. Now we're a much more diverse community, and that is a strong feature of our community, and I strongly support that. But it does mean that within our community there are different views, and views that are somewhat divergent from the traditional Christian views that are the foundation of many of the ideas on which we base our jurisprudence, base our, indeed, parliamentary tradition, and base our ideas of voting, our ideas of the common law, and so forth. So, the task for us as a community is to strike that balance, to realise that we've got to accept and praise and embrace the strength of having the diversity. But that does mean according a zone. It does mean according an area of activity to different traditions and different groups. And some of those, as I say, have views that I would vehemently disagree with. And the task in a liberal democracy like ours now, a diverse liberal democracy, is to find a way to accommodate those diversities and the tensions that are inherent in those positions, and at the same time protect individuals. And no one should believe that this is an easy task. No one should believe that this acting president is a task that any liberal democracy has an absolute or final answer to. This is an evolving task, and it will evolve over time going into the future. So, as Dr. Bark pointed out, our party has a proud tradition of advancing individual rights. My predecessor in this chamber, Haddon Storey, was the Attorney General who decriminalised homosexuality. I was very proud to be part of a government that brought through the expungement legislation, the Section 21A, and I could go on with a long list, but all of those expanding the zone and protections around individuals, allowing people's conscience to come to the fore, and reducing state intervention in the activities of individuals. And those are all important steps that we've taken. The idea, and my colleague also talked about the focus of another colleague, Jan Wade, and her work in advancing human rights through this parliament as well. So there are many contributions that have been made. I think the decision of the Baillieu and Napthine government to take some of those steps were important ones, but there are new tasks and new areas that we need to look at as we go forward. But I do think, as we proceed to expand the protections around individuals, we've at the same time got to work out how we accord communities and faith traditions and others with an appropriate and fair zone in which they can have their traditions and their religious beliefs expressed. The importance of schools and hospitals in those religious traditions is great. The importance of, the contribution of many of the great Christian groups in healthcare. The significant role in healthcare of those needs to be recognised. And again, there are zones there that need to be protected from the state pushing in and trying to impose a particular set of views which is divergent. So this, again, it's all about a balance and what can be struck reasonably in a broad liberal democracy. Each community might strike some different balance, and that is where I think the role of states is very important, because we might not all strike exactly the same balance. I'm very happy to put on record that I'm not always a fan of overarching federal views on some of these matters. Sometimes states have different traditions, and states would seek to strike a different balance than some of our various federal colleagues in these areas. The current federal laws, I should say, I largely support. I think are Yes, I see that. In conclusion, Acting President, that balance has not been struck in this legislation, and it is for that reason that the opposition will oppose it.